Hi everybody. So I finished all of the grading of the That's What I Like assignments. So hopefully everybody saw all their feedback and their grade and everything. Um, did you? Nods. Um, Not if you've gotten it. Um, I included a file with all of my track changes on it. So when I read it, I just type in how I would change it and it shows up in red and comments show up along the margins. So everyone should have received one of those files except one person who had no edits. So were people able to find those? Wait, did you see the attached file that has your assignment and you're able to see all my comments on it? If you somehow, if you haven't looked yet, check on that. And if you weren't able to find it, could you let me know? Because that takes me a really long time and I really want you to get that feedback. That's kind of the most important part. Um, and it's hard for me to see it the way that you see it. So somebody who did see it, can you tell us how you accessed it? Like where it was and how you opened it? Lily?
Basically, you just go in and you can go into the graded assignment and you can just look and download the file. You have to download it though. It's not too complicated. You just have to download the file.
Do you have to turn on track changes or anything like that, or does
No,
it
it's
show
already
up?
set there for you.
Okay.
So you
So
can, there's an evaluation status column and you can just go to the read feedback because it says it'll say unread, and then the attached file, you have to download that.
okay. All right, thanks. So if you try that and it doesn't work, please let me know because I want to make sure everybody gets that. It took me a while. All right, so you can all see the social anxiety disorder slide in front of you. Social anxiety disorder is pretty prevalent, so I'm sure some of you are already familiar with it, even before reading the text. Um, okay, so I'm starting off with, oops, or am I? Wait a minute. Okay. Um, I wanted to start off with a little clip of a person who has social anxiety disorder, just so you can kind of see how somebody feels and their own account of it.
I was just terrified because I wanted to get along with people, but I just didn't even know where to begin to start.
I thought, no biggie, she's just a little bit shy.
But Becky Bruno wasn't just a little shy. She struggled for years with social anxiety disorder before being diagnosed. Just as the name implies, the condition can socially cripple an otherwise healthy and intelligent person.
I would retreat to a bathroom in this building that I knew people wouldn't go in during lunch. And I would lock myself in one of the stalls and just cry a lot of the time.
According to the National Institute of Mental Health, about 15 million American adults suffer from social anxiety disorder. Some don't even know it, not realizing their social discomfort can be helped.
They get kind of paralyzed and
I was
What did
just
I do?
terrified because I
Sorry.
locked myself in one of the stalls and just
Disorder, some don't even know it, not realizing their social discomfort can be helped.
they get kind of paralyzed and tunnel vision, and they can't think of things to say. I suppose you would call that shyness. The worse it gets, the more it's like a social anxiety disorder.
Symptoms may include nausea, sweating, dizziness, and a rapid heartbeat. Some even go into a panic when in a large group of people. Because of these reactions, those afflicted tend to shy away from social situations. Becky dealt with her isolation by tending to her pets and by writing down her feelings in a journal.
I really felt like I was on stage, like people were watching me and just ready, like with pre notions to not accept me.
Eventually, Becky's fears became so debilitating that her mother got her professional help. After being diagnosed, she was put on an anti-anxiety drug, a critical component in helping patients break their cycle of social paranoia.
so that we arrive at the party in a calmer way. And then we're probably much more likely to be successful at the party in being social.
But medication alone is normally not enough. A comprehensive treatment also involves what's called cognitive behavioral therapy, where a patient is led to confront their fears in a controlled setting.
Suddenly, I wasn't afraid to talk to people.
These days, Becky is less interested in what others might think of her and enjoys spending time with friends of her own choosing, even in a crowd.
Okay, so some of the things that I think that clip gets across pretty well is that it can look like shyness in the beginning, and that gives you kind of a cue as to what some of the cause might be. Shyness is one of the earliest personality characteristics that you can identify in a very young child as early as toddlerhood. And it's one of the most consistent, it's one of the most maintained traits that tends to stay with someone, through childhood to adulthood. And kids who looked shy in childhood are more likely to have social anxiety when they get older. Of course, there are a lot of people who don't show shyness until they hit puberty, when a lot of people get much more self conscious and then it emerges then, right? And she said, she felt like she was on stage. That kind of speaks to a couple different types of symptoms to me. One is dissociation. When people dissociate, it's kind of a fancy word for spacing out or zoning, but it can go beyond that. And derealization is when you feel like you're in an alternate reality and the world isn't real. And sometimes people feel like they're in a scene, on stage in a movie or a show or something like that. So she was almost dissociating, which is kind of a step between normal behavior and psychotic behavior, like in schizophrenia. And the other part of that is the scrutiny that people fear who have social anxiety. They have a real fear that they're going to be scrutinized. And what does it mean to feel scrutinized or to be scrutinized?
To like examine someone or like inspect something very closely.
Yeah. So when someone scrutinizes someone, it's almost like they examine them under a microscope. So someone might have a parent who, before they go out, their parent kind of evaluates their outfit or how they've done their hair or, anything about them. When someone goes to a party, they feel that someone's going to scrutinize absolutely everything about them, how they walk, how they talk, what they say, exactly what they say and how they say it. And that's brutal, right? That thought, that apprehension is brutal, right? So people might avoid social situations or endure them with like a lot of discomfort. And either way, they might not learn that social situations aren't horrible, or sometimes aren't horrible, or a lot of the time aren't horrible, right? Because they either stay home and never get to learn alternative information, or they go and they're so uncomfortable that they don't get to kind of act like they would with a good friend at home, and nobody sees who they really are. So they don't get to have that kind of corrective learning experience of, people will see who you are and like you. right? People live in fear. People with this disorder live in fear of making fools out of themselves and being rejected. So going somewhere anticipating that, can have an effect on how people behave. And it can be kind of a vicious cycle. And some people have panic attacks in social situations. So I'm gonna go. So kind of the main feature is extreme fear or discomfort in social or performance situations. So some people can do okay at a party, but if they have to, publicly speak or, do some kind of other kind of performance in front of other people, it's just incredibly uncomfortable for them. There's a performance only subtype. Oh, it's down here, where the anxiety only occurs in performance situations. So they're okay. They don't have a ton of anxiety in everyday situations, like, asking for directions, talking to the mail carrier, that kind of thing isn't, devastatingly brutal. But then if they do have to get up in front of class and give a presentation, it's a major thing for them. I just have to remember something I want to say later. It has to interfere with somebody's ability to function. So that dysfunction criterion is there. Right. So if somebody still goes to parties and just acts a little shy, that's not enough for social anxiety disorder. It has to make it so, they're avoidant or they're not going or they're going and unable to function. Right. They're not able to meet new people, make decent relationships, that kind of thing. So they either, again, in a lot of the anxiety disorders, it's this either avoid or endure. So those are the two choices, avoid or endure. It's not like experience or enjoy or, have fun doing something. It's either, hide or white knuckle it, like just be holding on by a thread through the social experience. Okay. Oops,
I was just
show that again. Okay, so here are the DSM-5 criteria. So the number one, which is criterion A, they go by letters. Fear of social situations. So the person's exposed to possible scrutiny. Can you think of some situations that would be particularly difficult for someone in terms of feeling scrutinized? What are some things that would lend themselves to a fear of scrutiny?
If you go to like a new school on the first day and like go into a classroom with people you don't know.
Yeah. Especially, if other people started already or have been there for a while, right? That might kind of single you out, right? People might be looking at you more than they're looking at the other students, right? Anything else?
I just have a question.
Yeah.
For a lot of like the other disorders and stuff, there was like more of like a time limit, like 6+ months or so.
Yeah,
So
and there is on the next.
oh, it's on the next one. Okay.
Yeah. And it tends to be 6 months for like most of these. So if you have to guess on an exam, just be like 6 months. It tends to be the cutoff or the qualifier. So if you experience this like intense discomfort the first 3 months at a new school, it wouldn't be considered social anxiety disorder. It would just be a really difficult transition, but you wouldn't get diagnosed. Of course, there are plenty of psychologists who are like, you meet all the criteria, I'm diagnosing you with this, especially because you can't really get reimbursed by insurance companies unless somebody has a diagnosis. You can usually see somebody like 3 times or something, but then to see them more than that, the person has to have a diagnosis that warrants treatment, right? So they might just diagnose you anyway. So the fear of scrutiny is more than, are they going to like me? It's the fear that they're going to see every flaw on your face, everything that could possibly be wrong, with your outfit, with your attitude, with the way you speak, with the way you move, as though you're auditioning, for the role of an okay/cool person, by some pretty tough judges, right? Like trying out for, The Voice or something in front of Simon Cowell, or I don't know if he still does any of those, but something like that. So an audition situation would be tough. People with social anxiety disorder might not want to move to New York City and make their life, auditioning for Broadway shows, right? It could kind of limit your choices about what you're going to do, right? How about like pledging, is that what you call it? Pledging a fraternity or a sorority? I mean, don't they actually kind of judge your appearance and personality and interests? I mean, that sounds kind of scary for anyone. And then for somebody with social anxiety, it could be really difficult. So again, they're either avoided, social situations are either avoided or endured. How about asking someone out or expressing interest in someone? Situations where there's, a higher possibility for rejection. And if the rejection would be more public, more people would know about it. That's really tough. Or the more the person with social anxiety cares about the outcome. And the fear anxiety is out of proportion. Like it doesn't matter it doesn't matter if no one at the party liked you. And it doesn't matter if everyone at the party thinks you're a loser, right? Does it matter? It absolutely does not matter, right? If you have enough friends that you enjoy your life, right? And you can function and you enjoy whatever, education or occupation or hobby you have, and you have like love in your life or whatever, it really doesn't matter. But people with this disorder, it's the ultimate thing. And it's almost like their value 100% hinges on what other people think. And that kind of thinking is way more common in young people. And also the percentage of that's built into appearance is much higher in young people. In terms of dating, people under 30 consider appearance way more important in choosing a dating partner than people over 30. So if you're sick of that, there's something to look forward to in getting older. It doesn't all suck. Some of it's good, right? Okay. So yeah, it has to last for at least 6 months. It has to cause distress or dysfunction. And it's not because of a substance, right? Can you think of something like a recreational drug that might make you a little socially paranoid? What's a drug a lot of people use that makes them paranoid at a party? Weed, yes. So yeah, I remember I was at a party on Martha's Vineyard when I was like 28. And this person was expressing interest in me, and he then smoked a joint, and somebody told him I was studying to be a psychologist, and he got legitimately frightened, and he thought I was reading his mind. So yeah, that can interfere. It could look like somebody, has severe anxiety, maybe even delusions, if they're using a substance, right? There are other medical conditions that can make people particularly sensitive to rejection. Think about like premenstrual dysphoric disorder, hyperthyroidism, and then the treatments for some disorders can make people hypersensitive to rejection. One of the first symptoms of Parkinson's disease, which is a progressive disease, is depression. And hypersensitivity to rejection is a huge symptom of depression, right? So there can be a medical condition that causes this kind of behavior too. And then a specifier is performance only. If it's just restricted to giving a presentation or performing, playing an instrument or dancing or singing or something like that, then it's performance only. And a lot of people deal with that by just, when they apply for a job, they'll say, by the way, I don't do public speaking. I think I've talked about my friend who works with the homeless, have I? Who received like a national award for it. Have I talked about her? Oh, she's kind of amazing. And so she got an award for it, and she had to go to LA. So she had to receive it, and she had to say something, and it was a nightmare for her. And she's actually extremely outgoing in her regular life, like every day, her day-to-day life. So people, and she's so good at her job that everyone always wants her to give presentations and to give talks. And she just says at the beginning, every interview, I don't do public speaking. And every time someone asks her, she reminds them. So a lot of people just do that, and then they don't get hired into roles where they're expected to do that. Of course, that's not going to get rid of your fear of public speaking, right? Because what's the treatment for all forms of anxiety and fear?
Exposure therapy.
Yeah, it's it's exposure, which is a form of cognitive behavioral therapy where you behave in a way going towards the fear, doing the thing you're afraid of, that teaches you, cognitively, that doing that thing doesn't kill you and might even be enjoyable. Amanda?
Just like thinking about like social anxiety, could this kind of like overlap with like agoraphobia, kind of
Oh yeah.
being like fearful of like going out because you're gonna have to interact with people?
Oh yeah. Yeah. So people people who don't like talking to people, does anybody kind of like quarantine because you can order everything, electronically? You don't have to like talk to people online. When you were on campus, did you kind of like whip out your phone and text people in between classes so you wouldn't have to be like hi and like have that awkward moment where you see somebody you kind of know, what are you supposed to say to them, that kind of thing. So, and I do think that people with this kind of avoidance are going to have a tougher transition back to society when quarantine is over. I kind of include myself in that group. Um, but yeah, avoidance, I mean, agoraphobia is the ultimate avoidance. It's like I can't handle looking at people, talking to people, deciding how I'm supposed to interact with people, you know. So yeah, if we've gone through all of these. Oh, and I found a really great video about all of the causes, um, the potential causes for social anxiety. And it's a lot of things that we've talked about already this semester. They even go into how someone's propensity to have a social anxiety disorder can be affected by the security of attachment they had as a really young child. So, I mean, it just has everything in it. So I'm probably going to have to stop share and then share again. Can you see the YouTube video? Okay, so I will stop share. Share again. Oh, somebody said weed in the chat, sorry. So I stopped share and I'm gonna share screen again. Okay, you see the YouTube screen now with the yellow thing in it?
So, what are the causes of social anxiety disorder? Researchers have been preoccupied with this question for decades, and it turns out to be a tough one to answer. There has been a lot of progress in identifying its possible causes over the years, however, and a number of influential factors have been uncovered. There is emerging evidence that there are several pathways that can lead to the development of SAD. Current literature also points out that it is likely that an individual suffering from it has been affected by a combination of these factors, but this is not to be the case for everyone. Even though researchers have not been able to associate specific genes with social anxiety, data point toward familial links. The children of socially anxious parents are more likely to suffer from it than the children of non-socially anxious people. Thus, it has a tendency to run in families, and therefore it can be concluded that there seems to be a moderate genetic component to it. One way through which our genes influence our reactions to certain stimuli is temperament. When thinking of temperament, we usually picture uncontrollable outbursts of anger. But in the case of social anxiety disorder, it is a different type of temperament playing a causal role for many people. In comparison to most individuals who can engage with new people and situations more or less easily, this subgroup displays rather precautious and avoidant behavior, and tends to react with increased sensitivity when faced with unfamiliar stimuli. There is an increased risk of developing SAD for people who exhibit a stable childhood temperament of behavioral inhibition. Another factor that has been found to have an influence on the development of social anxiety is the attachment style of a person. In a famous study conducted by Mary Ainsworth, a young child and her primary caregiver are brought to a lab, separated for a short period of time, and then reunited again. Of special interest is the behavior of the child in this process. A securely attached child will display distress on separation from her or his mother, but calms down relatively easily when reunited with her. While about 60% of people account for this group, 3 types of insecure attachment styles have been described as well: the insecure ambivalent style, the anxious avoidant type, and the disorganized type.
Okay, so we talked about, you saw a child who was securely attached, right? She's not on this screen, right? And then there's 2 types of insecure attachment, and I talked about them but didn't name them. But the ambivalent child is the one who kind of has the approach avoidant behavior, like goes towards the mom or dad and then like kind of runs away at the last minute, is ambivalent about whether to greet the parent when they come back, just doesn't really know if it's safe or not. And that's thought to be a result of inconsistent parenting, right? And then there's the anxious avoidant child. That's another type of insecure attachment. And that child kind of ignores it when the parent goes away. And then when they come back, they're kind of like dismissive. They sometimes call this dismissive too. Like the parent comes back and they're like, actually, when they used to send pregnant women to the hospital, like to have babies, and they wouldn't come back for like a week or 2 because they did more postnatal care back then. Now they send you home in like 2 days. But so when my sister's 5 years older than me and my brother's 4 years older than me, so my sister was a year old when he was born, and my mother was away for a while. And when she came home, she was so excited to see my sister and greeted her, and my sister went and turned away from her, and she was 1, right? And that's like, so that's insecure avoidant behavior. And that's when the child thinks people aren't here for me, so I'm gonna just be on my own and I don't need anyone. So when a parent tries to reunite with them, they're kind of like, talk to the hand, I dismiss you. They diss the parent. They, you know, yeah, I don't know, that term diss is probably from before you were born, you know, when you diss somebody. Do you guys even know what that means? It's such an old term, but you know, it comes from dismissing somebody. And those are two kinds of insecure attachment. And then disorganized is the really unhealthy one that usually often comes from severe neglect, really intrusive parenting. And that one, disorganized parenting usually leads to more severe disorder, like dissociative disorders, where people have derealization and depersonalization, don't know where they are all the time, forget their identity a little bit, have big, huge lapses in memory, stuff like that, more disturbing, severe disorders. But people with insecure attachments are more likely to have social anxiety disorder and separation anxiety disorder, which makes sense. So they're healthier than kids with disorganized attachments, but they're more likely to have anxiety disorders.
Secure attachment style has been found to increase the chances of developing social anxiety disorder. Many people suffering from SAD report having been raised by parents that are overprotective, controlling, insensitive, rejecting, and emotionally distant. Therefore, a controlling and rejecting parenting style is believed to be another predisposition for the development of social anxiety. Parents of people suffering from SAD may also overemphasize the opinions of others, socially isolate their offspring when they are children, or use shame as a disciplinary procedure. Many people suffering from social anxiety can recall an experience which seemed to cause the onset of the disorder in their lives, or which worsened their symptoms drastically, such as struggling when reading out loud in front of class and being laughed at as a result.
Can anybody think of an example of this in like a friend's life or in a show or a celebrity's life, where, you know, one traumatic incident had a big effect on their ability to be social after that?
Someone typed in the chat.
Oh, bullying. Yeah. So if someone was bullied, that can kind of stick with somebody for a long time, right? And there are like celebrities and models who will talk about that. And even though they're like world famous, they still have issues with their sense of self and with interacting with people because of early bullying. Right. What's that book where the kid like touches the cheese in the playground? Do you guys know?
Diary of a Wimpy Kid?
Yeah. Yeah. And then he's like kind of ostracized because of that. And he has even more trouble socially because he like touched the cheese. Right. You know, it can be anything. Do you guys watch Atypical? Nobody watches Atypical. Some people do.
Yeah, I've seen it.
So is it Paige, the girlfriend? You know, she just has one horrendous first party where she hides and acts like she hides with cheese. Why is it always cheese? Do you know what I'm talking about? When she goes to a party and she like hoards the cheese and people call her, what do they call her? Party rat or something? What do they call her after that? I can't remember,
I
but
don't remember, but yeah, I know what you're
yeah,
talking
she's
about.
like socially ostracized after that, you know, so sometimes there's one event that people can pinpoint, you know, so sometimes it's this insidious thing, and sometimes there's some kind of acute kind of, you know, really traumatizing event.
A survey conducted in 1985, 58% of people suffering from social anxiety reported a traumatic experience being responsible for the outbreak of their problem. It can be concluded, therefore, that direct conditioning through.
Anybody recognize this name? Erst? Who's Erst? Anybody remember who this guy is?
Wasn't he in the video with the snake from Monday?
Yeah, he was the guy who treated the woman who had the snake phobia.
Or traumatic experiences accounts for another possible cause. Experiments with non-human primates have demonstrated the powerful impact of observational learning of fear responses, which leads to speculations about the causation of social fears by observing another human being experiencing a traumatic social event. Especially for individuals who have socially anxious parents, this might be a relevant cause. Another way children can acquire a fearful attitude from their parents is by observation and interpretation of their parents' verbal and nonverbal behavior. It has been speculated that this also accounts for socially fearful behavior, as children witness their parents being anxious around others or avoiding certain social situations. Thus, the child learns to be socially anxious by so-called information transfer. Negative life events and stressors, especially in childhood, also seem to be able to set the stage for the development of SAD. Literature names things such as moving various times during childhood, being sexually abused, parents' divorce, child illness, psychopathology of a parent, and family conflict. SAD seems to be associated with poor social performance, although there are many people suffering from social anxiety who don't seem to lack social skills. A vicious cycle was proposed in which SAD sufferers.
So do you get that? Did you get what they just said? So some people who have SAD, social anxiety disorder, don't have good social skills, right? But some people have perfectly fine social skills, right? Do you know anybody who hates going to parties, meeting new people, but they have a perfectly good personality when they go and nobody would guess? Does anybody know somebody like that? You know, once they get there, they have a good time, but beforehand, you have to kind of drag them. You know, there's a lot of people like that who don't feel like they have the energy to go, don't want to deal with getting ready. And then when they get there, they can do it. It's just kind of exhausting for them.
Show poor social performance, which results in negative social experiences. These experiences lead to more anxiety, which in turn leads to avoidance of social situations. Avoiding social situations, they are less likely to gain better social skills, which reinitiates the cycle by letting them perform poorly in future social interactions. Another well-researched trait of people suffering from social anxiety are so-called errors in thinking. There are many, but amongst the most typical ones are focusing on threatening cues instead of positive ones, and interpreting ambiguous social situations in a negative way, anticipating negative social outcomes and having lower expectations for one's own social performance. And
so has anybody ever thought, like after a first meeting, that somebody had a really bad first impression of them and then learned otherwise? I thought, oh man, that went poorly. And then you end up friends with the person and they're like, no, I thought you were great. So a lot of times people expect the worst and that frames their perceptions. And they're so rejection sensitive that they're like constantly scanning people. Oh, Caitlin?
Sorry, I just have a question. Based on like what it's saying, would you say that it's more like how the child is raised that they're more likely to have social anxiety, or is it like, because they don't say much about like the genetics of it?
Well, they're saying that there are so many different factors. In the beginning, they said there's a moderate genetic role. So that probably means it's like 30% of the variance, like meaning the differences between people and social anxiety can be attributed to whether they have the genes for it. And then there's all these other things like, did some traumatic social thing happen to them? Like, did they touch the cheese in the playground? Did they have parents who were who taught them to fear social situations? So there's just so many possible factors integrating, you know, so that's our integrative approach to understanding this pathology, is that there are a million different pathways to having social anxiety, And there are so many different possibilities as to how. It could be, like they said, a security of attachment issue. It could be because of a lot of moves in childhood. It could be abuse in childhood, the divorce. There are so many things that can trigger it. So, and if you think about like the diathesis stress model, it could be a combination of, having some genes for it and something happening, at the same time. And it's usually more than one thing. And remember, we talked about the 5-HTT gene and how people with long versions of the gene are much more likely to be okay with a bunch of stressful life events. They're going to talk about that too. People with short versions of the gene are much more likely to have social anxiety. So there's just so many interacting factors.
And overestimating the likelihood and cost of negative social outcomes. It is important to keep in mind that it is not clear whether cognitive biases form part of the causes or
Okay, so sorry, I'm interrupting it again. But part of cognitive behavioral therapy is saying, hey, you're probably not going to get rejected. Why are you positive you're going to get rejected every single time, right? And so everybody thinks, all right, you're replacing these automatic negative thoughts with other thoughts that are more realistic and more positive, right? But the other part is that people think they're going to die if they get rejected. And do people die if they get rejected? Like, think about if you had a really early, romantic experience. Did you think it was like the most important thing in the world? And now, how do you feel about it? Do you care at all? And like, are there things that when you were 10 that you thought were like earth-shattering and the most important thing in your life forever that you just don't really care about now? So part of cognitive behavior therapy is not just getting people to change their expectations for what's going to happen, like the outcome, but also talking about what's the realistic consequence of a negative outcome. Even if the worst thing that could happen happens, it rarely results in your death. People don't die of embarrassment, and that kind of thing.
simply are a result of social anxiety. Even though there is not enough evidence to prove the existence of structural abnormalities in SAD, there have been some interesting findings that suggest certain biological differences. It has been found that people with SAD show a stronger cortisol response when performing in front of an audience. People with generalized social anxiety seem to show a low dopamine system activity, and SAD seems to be associated with hypersensitive postsynaptic 5-HT receptors. The specific subtype of SAD shows a clearly higher heart rate activity in public speaking tasks, and the amygdala, which is also called the fear center of the brain, tends to show greater activation for certain stimuli. We got to be careful here as well, since we don't know whether these are causes or manifestations.
So you don't know. What they're pointing out is these are correlational studies that show this. So we don't know if people's brains kind of change to take these forms because they have SAD, or if they have SAD because their brains look like this, right? Oh, so it's not the gene that causes it, it's the receptors for 5-HT. So 5-HT is, the serotonin, and the receptors are the things on the dendrites of the neurons that take serotonin in. So it just means that serotonin doesn't travel as well through the brains of people who have SAD, right? Low dopamine activity, that makes sense. Their pleasure centers are less active, right? Cortisol, stress hormone, that makes sense even with what we know about security of attachment, right? That the less secure kids are going to have more stress hormone and they're more likely to have SAD. And we know that the amygdala is associated with fear and anger. So if you have more of that, you're going to be a little bit more cautious about social situations, right? So there's just a million study results that give us ideas about what's causing this.
Of social anxiety disorder, and if they are specific to SAD or also account for other anxiety disorders. There are other possible causes for social anxiety which are very difficult to be determined by science because they are highly specific to each individual. An example can be the development of SAD in order to protect the individual from overwhelming situations because she has never learned to take into account her own needs and desires when being around others. The anxiety symptoms, in this case, could be an unconscious strategy to stay away from others and be able to meet her own needs, which otherwise would never be met. Another very interesting factor is the culture an individual grows up in. While in Western countries, such as Germany, France, and the United States, being socially reserved and shy is seen as a negative personality trait. In East Asian countries, such as Japan and China, people show much more positive attitudes towards these features. This, of course, not only causes big differences in the suffering the disorder provokes, but also leads to less prevalence in East Asian countries and higher prevalence in Western culture, where the disorder.
Okay, so it has this kind of paradoxical effect, culture does. If it's okay to be shy, people don't kind of freak out about the fact that they're shy and therefore develop the symptoms of a diagnosis, right? Kind of like panic disorder. It's the fear of the fear that causes panic disorder. And it's a similar thing in social anxiety disorder. So this is just such a great example of a biopsychosocial model, right? There's so many biological factors, you know, the 5-HT, the dopamine, the amygdala, the genes. There are so many psychological factors, an experience of humiliation, right? Their interactions with their parents at a young age, and then the social factors, what culture they grew up in, right? Is it okay to be shy? Is it a big deal? Do you really have to try hard not to be shy because people view it as negative in your culture? Right? So that's gives you an idea how important an integrative view of the causes of a disorder are. All right, well, we will stop there and I will see you guys on Friday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.